It's Carrie again. Good to see you. I'm here with our Gardenside Chats with the Columbia Center for Urban Agriculture. Thanks for joining in today. In case you missed it, yesterday we talked about starting seeds at home in your house, and our little seeds are doing well. Not really any activity, but that's it. We'll bring them out when they start, germinating and stuff. But today I wanted just to carry on and talk a little bit about growing some herbs, some appropriate vegetables in containers. So I got a little setup today. Not everybody has a backyard that's conducive to gardening, and we get that. Or maybe you have a giant backyard, but you're not really ready to jump in feet first into this gardening thing. So containers, like big pots, are a great way to kind of like get started. Real simple, not a lot of time, not a lot of investment. I just have some like big plastic containers, as you can see. You can do like for this type thing, you can do big terracotta pots. Like on my driveway, I have really, really big terracotta pots that have herbs and flowers in them. You just want to make sure that if it freezes over the winter, that you have like a frost-proof one so it doesn't shatter. But these would work great. 5-gallon buckets with holes drilled in the bottom work great. So any sort of like vessel that you've got that you want to grow something in, most likely would work if you have drainage holes in the bottom. So you can see here, this one's got a couple, this one's got a big one in the bottom. You just want to make sure they have drainage holes. Another thing about growing a garden in a container is most likely you're going to have to water it more. And that's especially if you're using terracotta pots, because terracotta pots are pervious, so the wind can go through them. So wind on a windy day can move directly through that pot and dry out the potting mix, dry out the roots. So you're definitely going to want to check them to see if they need to be watered more frequently than the plants that you've got grown in the ground. If you've got like a glazed terracotta pot or a plastic pot or styrofoam even, those are impervious, so they don't dry out as fast. But just because it's in a smaller container above the ground, that means it'll get a little hotter in the summertime. So you still will also, because of that, want to water them more, just because it's a smaller like volume of soil. And so the smaller the volume of soil, the more work a little bit you're going to have to do. And in this case, work means watering. However, if you do this today, it's so rainy out that you might get this started today and may not have to water it for a little while because it's very wet out here. Anyway, not every vegetable or fruit plant or flower grows well in a pot. So you definitely want to kind of think about the things that you want to eat that can grow in a pot if you want to do some container gardening. So let's talk about things that do really well in containers. Herbs do really well in containers. They do really well in the ground too, but they do well in containers. I like to grow herbs in the containers because I put my herbs in pots on my driveway, like I said earlier, and I pass them multiple times a day. And herbs kind of need a little bit more love than some other plants. So I'm reminded on a daily basis to like trim my time and then put it in a dinner recipe that I'm making, instead of maybe forgetting it for a little longer in my backyard. So that, herbs do well because you see them more often, or you can place them in a spot where you see them more often in a higher trafficked zone. Smaller vegetables, like greens are a great one. Kale's great. Swiss chard, collard greens, lettuce, all of those things are great. Spinach even, those would all do well. Their roots aren't super extensive. They don't live for a terribly long amount of time. Kale, collards, and Swiss chard will be the longest lived of that list of greens I just gave you. Yeah, they're kind of space efficient plants. They would do really well. Some things that, before I move on, even like tomatoes, peppers, eggplant would do really well in containers if your container is big enough. So we're talking like 5-gallon bucket or larger for those things. In fact, sometimes I even recommend people to not grow eggplant in their garden at all and just do it in a big container in a sunny spot, because there's an insect called a flea beetle that will ravage most likely your eggplant in your garden, but they can't jump up to a pot, so you kind of save it that way. So there's some tricks like that that make container gardening really helpful. Other things that are good to plant in pots are things that we call like cut and come again. So these are things that maybe you don't just harvest once and like you're done. So that's why kale's great, Swiss chard, collard greens, all three of those things you can harvest a few leaves at a time and have them for months in your container. That's why herbs are great. A lot of them are perennials. I've got thyme and oregano and chives growing in a pot for a long time now, and I just keep harvesting them and they keep coming back, and it's wonderful. Things that don't do super stunningly in a container would be something like pumpkin. Pumpkin's a giant plant. Pumpkin and squash in general have a really what we call fibrous root system. So it's very relatively shallow in the soil and it spreads. So like a container like this and even a larger container is not going to provide the roots the room that they need to really like thrive so that you get a pumpkin. So no pumpkins, no butternut squash really. Another thing that wouldn't be great, although I've done it in a container, is okra. Okra gets really tall and it's beautiful. It's like in the hibiscus family, so it's got these beautiful little flowers. Well, they're not really that little, but beautiful flowers. So it's lovely as a edible landscaping component. However, it's, like I said, it's big. It needs a lot of space for its roots. And okra is something where you kind of need a lot of okra plants to get a lot of okra. One okra plant will produce like 1 or 2 okra pods a day, which, does add up, but so if it works for you, if it works for you. But I didn't find it worked for me very well. But it is a beautiful plant. And you can get red okra plants and it's lovely. I have heard and experienced different things about roots growing in pots. I've been told that some people don't think carrots do very well in containers, but I can say that I have grown carrots in the crates at the Lucky's grocery store, and they have been, in some seasons, depending on how wet it is and other kind of environmental conditions, the best carrots that we grew. So I think if you're trying to grow some roots like parsnips, carrots, radishes, turnips, as long as you have enough like depth in the container for the longer ones like carrots and parsnips, I think you would do just fine. And in fact, the fact that the container is going to be filled with potting mix means that they're probably going to be like really straight and like beautiful. Just be sure to water them is going to be kind of the trick for everything. So lots of things do well in containers. Some things don't. So just kind of know what you want to grow before you kind of plant it. And also know, it's important to know what you want to grow so you know how big of a container to scrounge up. Like I might put some greens and like some radishes in here, but I probably would not put a tomato plant. It might do really well for a little bit of time, but then in August it's going to not be enough pot for the plant. So you definitely want to match the pot to the mature plant. And this kind of ties back into what we talked about yesterday with potting up. So let's say I wanted to put a tomato in a container like this. Well, we started our tomatoes yesterday in these little yogurt cups. In a couple weeks or a few weeks, they'll be potted up into a larger container, and then you would pot that container up into the larger final container. I would choose a 1 or 2 size larger container than this one for something like peppers, tomatoes, and eggplants. All right, well, let's get to it. I've got a little like hands-on demo. I'm going to just pot some containers up. I got some seeds. I've got a whole bunch of baby plants that I can choose from, and we'll just kind of talk about how to do it and how to care for it after you do it. So like I said, having the drainage holes is really important, especially if you have plastic containers like I have here. A good trick for kind of filling the first couple inches of any pot is to use like gravel, broken terracotta pots, kind of anything to facilitate drainage out of the holes that's not potting mix. It's not like entirely necessary that you fill the first couple inches with something other than potting mix, but it just kind of keeps the potting mix inside the pot. So, you know, I didn't have a lot to choose from here, so I collected some wood chips that we have at the farm. Wood chips, you know, aren't the worst thing. They're definitely not ideal. I've definitely done it before with success, so it's not like, don't feel like this is not gonna work for you. One of the reasons why wood chips maybe aren't for the long term the best thing is because they can start to break down and then they'll ultimately wash out. But that would be if you have the pot going for a really long time. Another thing that wood chips can do is they can tie up the nitrogen in the soil, but if you have enough potting mix and your plant's roots only get down this deep, that shouldn't be a big issue. Like I said, I've done this before and it's been successful. Other things I've used is I've had a gravel driveway for a long time, and we have one here. Use some gravel at the bottom to kind of facilitate the drainage around the holes. From like the houseplant community, a lot of people use like the old packing peanuts that are styrofoam and fill like the bottom of the pot, especially if you have really large containers for like edible landscaping out in front of your house. The packing peanuts are good in that case because they make the pot a little bit lighter, and large pots get really heavy really fast. Okay, I'm going to just kind of fill just a little bit more wood chips at the bottom here so these bottom holes are full or covered. You can kind of see there that we've got the drainage holes covered, and that's really all you're going for. It's really just to keep the potting mix in the pot. So I've also got the same potting mix that I used yesterday, and I brought some more behind me. So I'm just going to kind of dump that in, and I've got more to kind of top off. Potting mix that you just get from any hardware store would be fine. Okay, just filling it up here. So this is a peat-based potting mix. For those of you who did not watch this yesterday, you want peat-based potting mix because peat moss kind of retains some moisture, which is really good, like we talked about for container gardenings. This white stuff is called perlite. It facilitates drainage, so you can have it hold too much water, and so the perlite kind of counteracts that. And then you can't see it, but inside or like included in this potting mix is some fertilizer. For a lot of things that I grow in pots on my front porch and in my driveway, throughout the season I do have to fertilize once or twice, just because you're just working with such a small amount of soil in this container that the plants just really need kind of a little bit more assistance from you. So a little bit more water, a little bit more fertilizer than something you would be growing in your garden. So I'm just going to kind of finish filling up this little green pot right here. And just like we talked about with the containers yesterday, you want to leave kind of a gap from the top of the pot to the potting mix, and that will help when you water, because you're inevitably going to be watering these at some point when it dries up. And you want the water to kind of sit and pool and absorb in instead of like kind of run off. So that's why you leave that little gap. Alrighty. So now we got our pots filled. We got the wood chips at the bottom so the potting mix doesn't run out. And so I brought a few seeds, and then we also have all these starts that we can choose from. So I got some lettuce seed. I've got some nasturtium seed, which is a really nice flower that's edible and just lovely. I've got some cilantro, so like I said, herbs grow really well. And I've got some radish seed, so we'll do some radishes too. And then we've got head lettuce, and we've also got some kohlrabi out here. And so I'm going to plant a kohlrabi bulb in this bigger one, and then some smaller things around it. And then we'll do some leaf lettuce in here and maybe a couple radishes. So if you're not familiar with kohlrabi, I just wanted to say a brief word about kohlrabi. I had no idea what kohlrabi was when I started to garden. And when I saw a picture of it, I thought it was hilarious. But I think maybe kohlrabi has grown in popularity since then. But if you're not familiar at all with this vegetable or like are really interested in it, it's kind of like a spherical broccoli stem. That's really good with like dips and stuff and stir fries, and it's really versatile. But I had a fireside or garden side chat that we're doing in a few days. We'll be talking about kohlrabi and some other brassica relatives. So tune in for that if you're interested in learning more about some kind of maybe unusual vegetables that you don't maybe see or haven't tried yet. So anyway, this is kohlrabi. This it's a little baby right now. Ultimately, when it grows up, it's kind of where these leaves are all starting to grow. It's going to grow this big fat bulb, and it's not going to be underground. It's going to be on top of the ground, and that's the part you eat. You can eat the leaves. You can eat the stems of the leaves, definitely, but they're kind of grown for the bulb, and it'll be a nice little sphere. This one looks like it could be a purple one, which would be really neat. So we talked about soil blocks a little bit yesterday. That's how we make the starts here at work. You can see it's a nice self-contained little cube of soil. Makes transplanting really easy. Maybe not the most transferable seed starting method for home, but works really well here. So what I'm going to do, and this goes for any sort of like transplant you're planting, be it in a little like tiny peat pot or a little tiny like black plastic thing that you have to pull it out. You want to plant the start deeper than it's growing right now. So what I'm going to do is plant it up to where all of the leaves kind of like start shooting from. So I'm going to plant it like, I don't know, 3/4 of an inch deeper than it's already planted. So I'm going to plant it to where the top of my finger is. And that's to give it a little more stability. That's to cover the soil block completely so that it doesn't dry out. So again, this is a soil block, but this would go for anything you've got a little start planted in, like a black plastic cube. You take it out of the container, and then you just kind of gently kind of like squeeze the soil. And that loosens up the roots a little bit, kind of gets them more established in the container a little bit faster. You want to be pretty gentle. This one's not a super filled out, so it's a little bit easier. Some have already kind of like grown in. The roots have already kind of grown into each other, so there'd be a little bit more breaking up. I only see like the very beginnings of like, so here's some of the roots, so it's not really like totally full, so it's making it a little bit easier. So I kind of got it squeezed, kind of loosened up a little bit. So I always kind of like to put the big thing in the back. I guess it's just like aesthetically pleasing to me. So I'm going to kind of put this one in the back, but I want to leave a little bit of buffer around the edge because it's going to get bigger. This plant's going to be like this big. So then I make a little hole, put it in the hole, and then bring the potting mix over. And you can see that I'm covering the potting mix up to where all those leaves kind of start to break off from that main stem. And then I'm going to pat it down, not like super hard, but firmly. And there you go. And then when I water it, it will also kind of settle a little bit more. So that's our kohlrabi. Those same like procedures would go for any sort of transplant you're planting in a container. So it's the same no matter what plant you're growing. So I'm just going to kind of clean off the leaves a little bit, and then I'll water it all a little better. Great. So I think a really nice addition to this kohlrabi would be some cilantro and some nasturtium. So nasturtium's a little bit of a trailing, kind of cool season flower here in Missouri. The seeds of the nasturtium plant are kind of cool. They remind me of brains. Nasturtium doesn't do like super well in full sun or full shade. They seem to prefer like half and half. at the urban farm, they grow the best where it's shady until noon and then sunny the rest of the day. So I'm just going to kind of sprinkle those around just kind of in one section. So like yesterday, I'm just going to plant it up into like the beginning of my fingernail. So I'm just going to poke each one down to the beginning of my fingernail. Also, just like yesterday, since I'm starting planting these seeds, I'm planting more nasturtium seeds than I actually want to be growing in this container, with the intention of thinning some out, because I don't know if all of the seeds I just planted are actually gonna germinate. So I had my cilantro. I wanted to do some cilantro over here. Let me see if here's the packet. So we talked about cilantro yesterday. Cilantro seed is actually the spice called coriander, but I'll show it again in case you weren't around yesterday. So if you cook with coriander, if you've seen whole coriander, that should look pretty similar. The coriander seeds are a lot smaller than the nasturtium seeds, so I'm going to plant those not as deep as the nasturtium seeds. And just like the nasturtium seeds, I'm going to plant more than I kind of want, with the intention of probably having to thin a little bit, or just knowing I'll have a nice thick clump of cilantro. Since cilantro is an herb, you can grow it a little bit closer together. The rules are maybe a little bit different than they would be with something like kohlrabi, for instance. Okay, so I got my cilantro kind of broadcast seeded. I'm going to just kind of push it down uniformly, and then bring some of this potting mix from the edge over to cover everything. All right. Now I got everything seeded. We got kind of our big guy, this kohlrabi. We've got some cilantro herbs, which will kind of grow up and then kind of slump over. And then we've got the nasturtium on this side, which will kind of trail. So hopefully it's going to look really nice. So very important, after you seed anything in a container, in a little pot in your house, in the garden, you want to water it. So I got my watering can. You want, especially like right now when you just planted some seeds, you want a watering can that's not like just an open spout where water is just like pouring out like a little faucet. You want the trickle to be more like kind of gentle, while the peat moss potting mix kind of gets settled and while things kind of take hold. Maybe maybe in like 6 weeks, when everything's a little bit more sturdy and it's a little bit warmer out, I would be fine with just like putting a hose on it. But right now, that would be a little bit destructive. I'm not going to water as much as I would if it were like in the place that I want to keep it. But usually you want to water it until you see water starting to come out of the drainage holes. Just so you know for that first time that the whole pot is moist. Because you don't want to continuously only water it enough for like this much to be moist. You need the whole thing to have moisture so the roots can go down and utilize the whole size of the pot. Great. So we got the big one done. This smaller one, I was thinking we could just do some radishes and some leaf lettuce. Both of those are really quick, pretty small plants. So they should be like nice companions to each other in this little pot. So what if we did like some radishes on the outside and then some lettuce on the inside? So radishes, since it's a root, and we want to give it space to make the roundness of the root, we want to definitely know that we're going to have to thin them and also spread them a little bit out. So I'm spreading them about an inch and a half apart, just kind of all around the edge of the container, giving them an inch or an inch and a half in all directions. And that should give them enough space to make a nice little round radish root. Radishes are one of the quickest things that we can grow here in Missouri. So these, if the weather is great and they germinate fast, they could be ready in as little as 3 weeks. So that's pretty quick as far as gardening goes. So I did my ring of radishes, and then I'll just do kind of a little bit of leaf lettuce here in the center. So it is important to note that when you're seeding a planter, you might be tempted, because they're tiny, to way crowd it. it's just really important to know that vegetables, especially roots, need some space. And just know that when they come up as little babies, they're going to look so small in this big container, but have faith that they'll get a lot bigger and they'll fill out the space. So we'll talk about this as these containers mature, but you definitely need to respect this physical space each vegetable needs. So the lettuce seeds and the radish seeds were really small. So I just kind of sprinkled them on top. So now I'm just going to kind of like pat them down a little bit, and then get just a little sprinkle of potty mix just to kind of sprinkle over. Just kind of like that.
And why is it important to sprinkle the potty mix? I've always wondered this.
So Tamara asked why it's important to sprinkle the potty mix over. So most seeds need to germinate in the dark. But if you push them down with your fingers, you might be pushing them down too deep. So they just barely need to be covered, but they do still need to be like out of the sun, essentially. So it needs to be dark, but just, just at the top, because the seeds are so small, they don't have a lot of energy to grow through the soil to pop out. So you really just need to give them just a little bit of covering. And this is where what we call the rose works really well. It's not really disturbing not too bad at least, disturbing the potty mix and the seeds, so they're not like really floating away. And then again, I would water this until I saw water starting to like seep out of the bottom. But oh, perfect. And that's happening as we speak. Great. All right, so now what I would do with these is I would go put them where I wanted them. So both of these, you want about at least 6 hours of sunlight. So for me, that would be, well, you need to back up. You need 6 hours of sunlight and somewhere where it's easy and accessible to water. So for me, those two locations kind of converge in my driveway. So I would put these in my driveway. Out here at the farm, we have containers around lots of spigots. So it makes it really easy when we turn the spigot on. All we have to do is put the hose next to it. So you kind of want to think about how easy these, like to set it up so it's easy for you to maintain them over the spring and summer. So we'll bring these back in later episodes just to check on how they're doing and kind of hear how your guys' are doing. I did want to mention just really quick a really heartwarming story about gardening that happened to me earlier this week. It's kind of crazy times. This is why we're doing this. Everyone is kind of in the same boat with the uncertainty. So I came home from work, I guess on Tuesday afternoon. It was kind of a stressful day and I wasn't in the best of mood. So me and one of my boys went out to our garden and we planted peas and we planted carrots, and it was like the best time ever. It took 30 minutes. We have some like turnip greens and scallions that are still living from last fall that we planted, and he spent most of the time just like eating these things, and I was like planting and he was like throwing weeds to see how far they could go and playing with the worms. And it was just like really the best thing that both of us could be doing, because his school is out of session now. He was going through a lot of stress because of the uncertainty. No one really knows what's going on. But we both went out to the garden, did just a little bit of gardening together, and it really changed the rest of the day, at least for me. And I could tell by how he acted the rest of the night for him as well. So that's why doing this kind of thing right now is so important, because it really does relieve some stress. So anyway, that's it for today. Thanks so much for tuning in. We hope you learned something. If you have any questions, let us know. We've been stocking the seeds at the Little Free Library, so feel free to go get some seasonally appropriate seeds at those places. And please like, plant, and subscribe to see our future content. Please visit our website, columbiaurbanag.org, for more information and to learn about our mission. So see you tomorrow. Thanks.